what I'm doing. So let's get started. What is our goal here in filter by URL? What we would like to do is, as you know, IronSpeed Designer creates a show table page for many of the database tables that you've got in your database. And normally, we automatically create a number, at least two, but you could also create more filters on that page. Like in this particular example, you're looking at a show products page, and there are two filters that are already added below the search area. One of the filters is supplier, and the other is category. This is great, but in some cases, what you would like to do is you would like to specify this filter value on the URL. The reason for doing that is sometimes you may want to effectively put a menu item as an example, which takes a user to a pre-filtered list. And rather than creating a different page, for example, that shows a pre-filtered list as an example, you may want to pass in the URL value, or pass in the filter value on the URL, so that initially you start out displaying that page already pre-filtered, and then the user can then essentially, from that point onwards, can expand that and look at all of the entire table, for example, or then further narrow it down. So either one of those are possible, basically. So that's what we want to accomplish, basically, here in with the filter by URL code customization. So as you can see, the first step is what we would do is we would take the URL value, and then we would set the filter, and we would only show the filtered data in the show products table. What we're going to do here is the strategy for us is that this particular code customization requires code customizations. Of course, can't be done by just changing some properties in the designer user interface. And there are two things that we need to do. We need to modify the CreateWhereClause to include the new URL parameters. So obviously, when the table is being displayed, a where clause is being used in order to create the SQL where clause that is necessary for reading the data from the database. And what we need to do is add a URL parameter to that where clause. The second thing we need to do is we also need to modify the populate method on that drop-down list for the filter and set the current value. And that's the goal that we need to accomplish here. Those are the two code customizations that we will do here with this particular example. Now, the first thing, and now what I will do is I'll skip through and actually show you how this is accomplished. But let me just quickly go through the slides here. What we're going to do is we're going to override the CreateWhereClause. And one of the things that we have done in version 6.2 is made it very easy for you to find where these functions are and be able to easily modify them within IronSpeed Designer. You can certainly use Microsoft Visual Studio in order to make those changes as well, but you can certainly start out in IronSpeed Designer. So as an example, if you zoom out to the product, to the page level on the show products table page on the breadcrumb is the area right next to the design mode. It functions very similar to the Windows Explorer breadcrumb. And if you zoom out effectively by clicking on the show products table.aspx, meaning at the page level, you will see a spreadsheet layout at the higher level showing the entire table control effectively that is available on that page. And when you select the table control, you will see a cell editor at the bottom, as well as a number of commonly customized functions that are available at that level for that particular control. In this particular case, it's the products table control, which is essentially the table control panel that you're seeing. So what we want to do there is then, of course, select the CreateWhereClause code tab. All of these are called code tabs in our vocabulary. And then you can look at the actual code that has been generated by IronSpeed Designer. You can take this code and modify it, and all of your modifications will be preserved. So none of your modifications that you made here will be lost ever. They will always be preserved for you, so you are able to make changes without having to worry about any of this being overwritten. So let's talk about the kind of the overall picture effectively that we are trying to accomplish over here. As you know, when we would generate a number of pages, we actually generate a number of classes and a number of controls for you on that page. So the classes, if you look at on the upper right-hand side, you see the classes in the yellow over here, where you're seeing essentially a page class, a table control class, and a row class, a class that corresponds to each row on the table. Our code customization here is being done at the table control level effectively, because the table control essentially defines the where clause, not the individual row. So that's what we are trying to accomplish over here, is to do the code customization at the table control level. Within the table control level, of course, what we want to do is essentially modify the CreateWhereClause here. So if you look at the hierarchy of all of the functions that are called on a page when a table control is being loaded in order to display the data, you will see that we handle the init event and the load event from the page, essentially, that is being sent by Microsoft.NET Framework. Within each one of these events, then we do a variety of other functions. For example, in the case of the load event, we will then call a page load method, which eventually calls the load data method at the page level. And finally, the load data method at what's called the table control level. So the job of the load data is to load the data from the database. And load data then goes on to essentially create the where clause, and then finally calls the get records function in order to read all of the records from the database. So what we want to do here is call the modify the CreateWhereClause to insert our additional where clause based on the URL value that is specified on the URL. So here is a sample code here of the CreateWhereClause. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to cut and paste this code inside of IronSpeed Designer, and then be able to show you and walk you through how that works. So let me go to IronSpeed Designer over here, and what I'm going to show you is if I go back to the show, if I look at the breadcrumb at the top here, there is a master page, and then there is a show products table page. So by clicking at this level, I am zooming out to the highest level effectively on the page. As you know, we show you a spreadsheet grid, and then each level is another, think of this as table TRTD tag effectively that is specified. So what we want to do here at this point in time is click on the products table control and look at the code tabs that are displayed at the bottom. There is, of course, a cell editor, but one of the code tabs, as I mentioned to you, specifies CreateWhereClause. Now, what I have done before this is I created a Word document that lists kind of the detailed instructions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to my Word document and copy the CreateWhereClause. Saves me from you watching me type all of this function over here. And I'm going to just basically eliminate this entire function and replace it with my function effectively over here. Notice that when I do that, something else happens. The CreateWhereClause tab is then shown in a different color, basically. And in this particular case, that indicates that I have modified the CreateWhereClause with my own changes. Now, at any point in time, I can always press the Restore button in order to restore it back to the original. But any changes that I have made on this particular code tab will be preserved no matter what other changes that I make anywhere in the application. So you never have to worry about your code being overwritten if you make changes in the code tabs, basically. So let's look at what exactly is happening in this CreateWhereClause. What's happening in this CreateWhereClause is that what we do is we essentially define a new variable called WC, which is a where clause, and we call the underlying base CreateWhereClause. By calling the CreateWhereClause, we are actually going to let IronSpeed Designer do its work, meaning that whatever the generated CreateWhereClause is, we want to take advantage of that generated where clause and essentially say, why don't you go ahead and create for me whatever you had created before. All I need to do is I need to add to that where clause rather than actually make any, rather than replace it completely. So in this particular case, I'm going to call the mybase.createWhereClause. I check to make sure that the returned value is not nothing, and if it is nothing, I will define a new where clause so that I can start using it. Now, here's another check that I make, which is an important check, which is what I want to make sure is that the filter that is specified on the URL is only applied the first time the page is displayed. I do not want to take that filter and apply it again and again and again after the user, maybe makes some change. So let's say, for example, when you first come to the page, you see a particular value that is already being filtered, but then you may go back and then broaden the value or maybe filter it further. So in either one of those two cases, I really do not want to modify the page and apply these filters again. I only want to do it the first time around. So that's the reason why what we do here is we check to see if the isPostBack flag is true. IsPostBack will be true. This is a standard .NET property on the page. IsPostBack will be true only if the page is being loaded a second time or a third time and so on. It will not be true the first time around. So if the postback flag is true, we simply return the where clause that was returned by our underlying base function. So this way, second and third and fourth times, we're just going to essentially use whatever was created by IronSpeed Designer. Now, so the following lines will only get executed if for the time when the page is being first loaded. So in this particular case, what we want to do is retrieve the two URL parameters. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the standard .NET function called request.queryString on a page class. And we request essentially the URL parameter supplier. And in addition to that, in this case, what we want to do is filter by two parameters, one by supplier and one by category. So we retrieve both of these values. And then what we're doing is we're doing our proper error checking just to make sure that, hey, listen, the supplier was actually specified, because there may be a case it may not be supplied. And then what we want to do essentially is use essentially the IAND function to AND another where clause. And the IAND function essentially takes three parameters: the left-hand side, the operator, the right-hand side. In this case, we're going to specify the left-hand side as the supplier ID. We're going to use the equals to, and then we're going to essentially supply the supplier that was retrieved from the URL parameter. So that's how we are able to add an AND clause to the existing where clause that was originally returned by the mybase.createWhereClause earlier in this function. There is also a fourth parameter to IAND. It is an optional parameter. What this essentially does, it basically uses what it does is it supplies effectively, it makes a determination whether you want the comparison to the underlying ID or the display foreign key as value. Now, let's go back and let's talk about what that means. So if you think about it, the products table contains a supplier ID. So the supplier ID may be something like 37 or 42 or 75 or something like that. It's a number. It's an ID essentially. However, when we are passing it on the URL, we are not passing the ID. We are actually passing the display foreign key as value, which is actually the name of the supplier in this particular case. So what we have to do is we have to tell IronSpeed Designer or the generated code over here, your application, that when you use this where and select where clause, do not compare with the raw ID, but instead use the expanded or the display foreign key as value for comparison. So what the generated code will then do is it will take the supplier that you may have specified, like exotic liquids, convert it into an ID, 37 for example, and then use that as part of the where clause. So that's the reason why we want to set the fourth item to be true. If you do not set it to true, it will be set by default to false, which means it's going to try to compare it with the ID. And of course, in this particular case, we will fail if you specify the full name of the supplier in this case. The same process is repeated for the category as well, because we are passing in 2 URL parameters. And then finally, we simply return the where clause. So what we have done here is we have done half the code customization now. We have simply modified the CreateWhereClause so to take into account the changes that when we pass in essentially a supplier with or a category, for example. So that's the first half of the code customization. The second half is that I'm going to switch back to my PowerPoint slides over here, and I'm going to talk about the second thing that we need to do. We also need to update our drop-down filter. We need to basically say that, aha, you've selected exotic liquids as a supplier, so we need to show in the drop-down that, hey, the current selection is exotic liquids. Well, how do we do that? The way we do that is that we want to modify the populate filter function that is called as part of the data bind. Now keep in mind that the load data occurs before the population of the filter, because you're loading all of the where clause and so on. So that's the reason why we need to modify the populate filter as well. If, for example, in the architecture, the CreateWhereClause and the load data had occurred after essentially the populate filter, you would probably only need to make modification once, and then it will be picked up by the CreateWhereClause. But really, the reason why it is done after is because you are binding the filter after you're loading the data. So even though the filter is being bound requires loading some additional data, it's really a function later on. So the correct architecture is to load the entire table first and then populate any supporting controls after that. And that's the reason why the populate filter is essentially populated in a data bind method rather than in load data. So what I need to do is also now modify the populate filter in order to accomplish that. How do I do that? Again, I will go back to the spreadsheet grid or the design mode that we've got, the spreadsheet layout. And now I'm going to zoom into the filter section. When I zoom into the filters section, I will see the filters area within the panel. Initially, I was kind of at the 5,000 foot level, if you will, when I was looking at the products table control panel. Now I've zoomed into the filters section. When I zoom into the filters section, I'll see both the category ID filter and supplier ID filter. If I select the supplier ID filter, I'm going to see all of the supporting functions that were generated as part of that thing, and one of those functions is populate. And what we're going to do is we are going to effectively modify the populate method in order to set our own selected value over there. And by the way, we need to repeat that for the category ID filter as well, because now we are passing in potentially as many as two values here. So here's the populate filter. Again, I'm going to copy and paste it from our cheat sheet over here. And so what I'm going to do is switch back to RSP Designer. And as I mentioned to you, what I want to do is I want to go to the filters area. Now on the right-hand side, there is another hierarchical drop-down that shows all of the different sections on the page. So this is an easy way for me to navigate very quickly into the filters section by simply clicking the products filters area. And I immediately see the two filters that I'm most interested in, the category filter and the supplier ID filter. Now, notice that we have changed the CreateWhereClause. The CreateWhereClause is also shown in the case of the filters area as well. But in this particular case, so when I'm looking at the CreateWhereClause, it's the same function that I typed in over here, and it, of course, shows it in color-coded, so to indicate that I have made a change on the CreateWhereClause. I can now then go to the populate function over here and simply highlight and replace it from the thing that I copied. So again, let's go back and look at what I'm trying to do. What I'm trying to do over here is call the base populate supplier ID filter, so that what I'm going to do is I'm going to let the underlying function that was generated automatically do its work, so that what it'll do is it'll fill up all of the supplier IDs in that filter dropdown. And then I want to make one change basically, which is what I want to do is retrieve again the supplier from the URL. And if it is not postback, we're making the same check as before in the CreateWhereClause, and it's not nothing, meaning that there is a value that is specified, we'll actually look for that particular value by calling find by text. This is a standard items.findByText that's available for any .NET drop-down control, basically. We're looking for that URL value. And then if we do find it, we set its selected flag to true. So what this will do is it'll ensure that when I do specify exotic liquids, it will be selected in that. That's all I have to do. I'm going to repeat this process for the category ID filter. And so I'm going to go back to my cheat sheet over here and then copy the selected ID filter, the category ID filter, switch back to IronSpeed Designer, highlight this thing, delete it, and then paste the other one. And this is exactly the same. The only difference is the query string now belongs to the category, and then I do me.categoryIDFilter.items.findByText. Almost all of the code over here are except for this Populate category ID filter called here. Everything else is .NET because category ID filter is a standard .NET control, and that's all there is to it, basically. So now if I switch over to live preview, all of this is built for me, and then hopefully if everything works okay, it'll display the show products table page for me. Now in this particular case, I'm not passing anything on the URL, so presumably it'll display everything that is there. So what I'll do is I'll run this in a browser over here, just so that we can play around with it a little bit more. And you will now see the show products table page with all of the categories and all of the suppliers. So now let's say, for example, we want to essentially filter only by beverages. Now certainly I could do it this way and see only 12 items over here, for example, rather than all. But if I wanted to change this and say question mark categories equal beverages, now it will automatically, oops, what did I do? Oh, category. I think what I did was I specified the variable as category and beverages, and now it'll display only the 12 items that are here for beverages, and it automatically pre-initializes it to that. Now I could also apply another thing over here, which I can say supplier equal exotic liquids. Okay, and presumably if I do this, now I see only 2 items basically being displayed over here. Now I can take this URL, and of course, as I mentioned to you, the reason why you want to do that is that maybe you create a new menu item which says it's pre-filtered effectively products, so you might put a beverages from exotic liquids as a menu item so that when you go over here, it's already pre-filtered. You could also put links in other pages basically that show this thing. So for example, you might say, for example, if you've got a system that keeps track of sales and orders, you can create a link for each salesperson, and when somebody clicks on that salesperson, you show all of the orders just specific to that salesperson. And by passing in the URL here, the salesperson's name on the URL.